So these days we are reading passages in the Gospel of Luke that take place around meals. This week, Jesus has been traveling around preaching, still followed by big crowds of people who want to hear what he says. And he's just finished preaching when our passage today starts. This is a reading from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 11, verses 37 to 46. Hear now the word of the Lord. When Jesus had finished speaking, a Pharisee invited him to eat with him. So Jesus went in and reclined at the table. But the Pharisee, noticing that Jesus did not first wash before the meal, was surprised. Then the Lord said to him, "Now then, you Pharisees clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness. You foolish people, did not the one who made the outside make the inside also? But give what is inside the dish to the poor, and everything will be clean for you. Woe to you, Pharisees, because you give God 1/10 of your mint, rue, and all other kinds of garden herbs, but you neglect justice and the love of God. You should have practiced the latter without leaving the former undone. Woe to you, Pharisees, because you love the most important seats in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplaces. Woe to you, because you are like unmarked graves, which men walk over without even knowing it." One of the experts in the law answered him, "Teacher, when you say these things, you insult us also." Jesus replied, "And you experts in the law, woe to you, because you load people down with burdens they can hardly carry, and you yourselves will not lift one finger to help them." May God bless the reading of this holy word today. So that passage started with kind of a difference of opinion that Jesus had with the religious leaders. Like many arguments we get into, there is like a surface level content that the argument seems to be about, but actually there are deeper emotions going on. It's the difference between what it sounds like you're fighting about and what's actually bothering you. Like when partners fight about, the thermostat or how to load the dishwasher the right way. If you ever get into a knockdown, drag-out fight about one of those things, it's not really about that. It's about something else. Even though, sure, there's a right and wrong way to load the dishwasher, but that's okay. In today's passage, on the surface, it seems to be about cleanliness. The Pharisees really care about what you can see on the outside, but as always, Jesus looks deeper. But let's give these uptight Pharisees some benefit of the doubt and think about it this way. When have you been disgusted? Have you ever walked into a public restroom or maybe used the bathroom in a shady gas station, and as soon as you open the door and step in, you go, "Yeah," and you don't want to touch any surface at all for fear of contracting every disease? Maybe it's late at night, you're on a long, dark interstate drive with few options, but when you gotta go, and it's a potty emergency. But when they hand you a key on a stick and point outside, you know you're in trouble. They can't all be as nice as Buc-ee's, am I right? Them's the breaks. I remember when our kids were little and they still needed some help going to the bathroom. If we had to use one of those gas station men's rooms, we would walk in and my germ alarms would go off because I know that kids like to touch every single thing. And I would say, "All right, son, while we're in here, don't touch a thing." Now, I'm usually not a germaphobe kind of guy. I follow the 2-second rule for things dropped on the floor. You blow it off and it's completely sanitized, right? That's how germs work. But I admit that even I can get grossed out by skanky gas station bathrooms. Just by looking at it, you feel icky. Ugh. And that's what the Pharisee feels in our passage when Jesus does something that he absolutely can't believe because it's so disgusting and icky. Now, we've talked about the Pharisees recently, so I won't go into detail again about who they were, but they did study the scripture constantly and were committed to living the most perfect godly life possible. So all the rules and laws in the Bible, they made sure people followed them. I assume there was a lot of finger wagging. And since Jesus often did not follow those rules, that's why the Pharisees hated him and had him killed. It hasn't reached that drastic point yet. So in our story, one Pharisee is intrigued that Jesus is attracting such large crowds and delivering such interesting, if not dangerously radical messages about forgiveness. So he invites Jesus to dinner, maybe to get to know him, maybe to scope him out, or maybe it was a keep your friends close, but your enemies closer situation. Either way, it's dinner time. We don't know if this happened at the Pharisees' home or if it was at an inn or something like that. But it seems very spur of the moment, kind of right near to where they already are. Jesus accepts the invitation and steps inside. They recline at the table and get ready to eat, but the Pharisee notices that Jesus doesn't get ready the way you're supposed to. He doesn't wash his hands. Disgusting. Now, it's always good to wash your hands before you eat. I think we can all agree on that. It's a fine practice. Especially if you've been out doing yard work, gardening in the dirt, working on your car, petting farm animals or something. You would definitely want to wash your hands while singing happy birthday twice with the soap before you eat. But if you're just having a normal day, like inside the house or at work, it's probably okay. I mean, here at the church, I'm not going to get the Ebola virus from my desk, So I admit I don't wash my hands before every single meal, I confess. But this problem in our story, it's not really about germs. People back then didn't even know what germs were. So this Pharisee is concerned about, he's not concerned about getting dirty or sick physically. He's concerned about being dirty or sick spiritually. And to be spiritually pure, you had to follow lots of specific Bible verses, like the ones in Leviticus no one follows anymore because Jesus didn't either. All kinds of ceremonial, ritual washings that people thought was required to be spiritually clean. Because you can't be spiritually clean if you're not physically clean, they thought. The outside appearance was the most important. So when Jesus doesn't do the ritual washing, you can hear everyone clutching their pearls when he sits down to eat. How could he? The Pharisees would have thought it was completely icky and disgusting. Not so much physically, but spiritually disgusting. Can you believe what he's doing right now? Disgusting. So Jesus could always read a room perfectly and knew what people were thinking. So he knows this is a teachable moment. But he doesn't ease into it gently. He lays into them for their shallowness and their fakeness. He's like, you Pharisees, you're clean, you clean the outside of a cup or a dish, but on the inside, it's like you're full of greed and wickedness. Ouch. Jesus doesn't waste any time with small talk at this dinner. He looks at his host, knows what the Pharisee is thinking, and tells him straight up, you got it wrong, man. You're worried about the outside, the performance of looking all clean and religious, but it's on the inside. That's where the real problem is. Jesus said, you give a good offering, 10% of your garden harvest. You're meticulous about how people should act, but you neglect justice. You neglect the love of God. You've kept all the rules, but missed the whole point. Ouch. Ouch indeed. The problem is that religion, any religion, including ours, has a tendency to drift towards performance, to making everything look right and making everyone act right, to focus on the outside of the cup, doing things that look like faith instead of doing sacrificial actions of real faith. It's been a temptation every century. And good people who are trying really, really hard to do everything right can fall into that trap. You want to be your best, so you try to always meet a certain standard. But then after a while, keeping up that standard becomes your motivation, like the most important thing. And then you start judging other people by whether or not they meet those standards that you have set. And then you start feeling pretty good about yourself because you do what you think you're supposed to. But you don't notice that your whole priority list has gotten flipped upside down because you're more concerned about what things look like on the outside. It's when you spend more minutes and hours getting the perfect Instagram picture instead of just enjoying the moment. It's a temptation on the outside that has plagued and has poisoned people in churches for hundreds and thousands of years. Like in churches, it's when you're more concerned that someone is sitting in your pew than if they actually feel the welcome of Christ in your church. Or when it's more important that things are spotless than if people in your neighborhood can afford rent that month. When people have to look or act or dress the right way before they are invited into worship. When it's more important to keep up appearances than it is to love the people inside your building or in your parking lot or in your community. That's when you're caring about the outside of the cup, making sure it looks exactly the way that you like, nice and clean on the outside. But for the Pharisee and those like him, they don't notice the inside. It's not looking so good. Now, the Pharisee didn't think he was being hypocritical. He genuinely only cared about and looked at the outside of himself and others. He couldn't even see inside. No wonder keeping up appearances was important. When you can't see any deeper, the outside is all there is. How else can you judge someone else's righteousness, right? Well, aside from the fact that we shouldn't be judging anyone else's righteousness anyway, it's not found on the outside. But the Pharisee hasn't learned that yet. His spiritual vision, he's kind of nearsighted. It hasn't developed past just the surface level. So Jesus criticizes that, much to the bother of the Pharisees. With all their traditions and rules and practices, what's the point, Jesus asks, if it doesn't actually help people? Like there was another time when Jesus was breaking the rules of the Old Testament. The Pharisees got mad at him again and said, "Why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" And Jesus said, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath." Meaning those good guidelines for how to rest on a holy day, the Sabbath, they aren't there to be followed for their own sake. They were made for the benefit of people resting and being nourished. It's kind of like the whole hand washing thing. Is it good to wash your hands before you eat? Yeah, of course it is. But is it sinful not to? No. And that's where the Pharisee misses the point. Jesus is like, what's the point of religious practices if they don't show love or uphold justice or help people grow? Because if it's just feeling good about yourself, look at me, I'm holy and going to church, then that is only self-serving. Indeed, if you're just doing religious-y, churchy stuff because it's the way you're used to and you think things should look, then that just means it's a nice performance, like a religious show we put on because we think we're supposed to. Meanwhile, we don't actually care enough to go to much trouble to show the love of God and build justice, like Jesus said. Will be nice, sure, but not if it's like a bother, you know? Like if people get in the way. And that's the mindset of a dirty cup. One that looks really good on the outside, but not on the inside. Yikes. So what's a stodgy but well-meaning Pharisee to do? How do you fix it? Well, as always, just listen to Jesus. He tells us what to do in verse 41. He says, "Give what is inside the dish to the poor, and everything will be clean for you." Another English translation says, "Clean the inside by giving gifts to the poor, and you will be clean all over." That's interesting. But Jesus, quick follow-up question here. Couldn't we just come to church every Sunday and bring our Bible and give an offering and dress nice? And that kind of covers everything, yeah? And then we're good? Like an hour or two Sunday mornings? Jesus says no. But if you are generous to the poor, he says, then everything will be clean for you. Interesting. That is the inside of the cup. Generosity, sharing, loving openly, actually seeing the people around you who are struggling, and then doing whatever you can to help. Not because it earns you anything, not because anyone is watching, but because that's what God's love looks like in the world. So, now we know. I guess we can decide if we really want the inside of our cups, our hearts, to be clean or not. Jesus laid it out pretty plainly. He doesn't pull any punches. He probably ruffled a lot of feathers that day, as he often did. So someone there spoke up. Apparently there were other people at the dinner with them. It's an expert in the religious law. Their job was to explain to everyone what all the religious rules meant, and then the Pharisees would enforce those rules. We might call them like a Bible scholar today or something. And those religious experts always hung out with the Pharisees, since they were very simpatico, those groups. And up until this point in the conversation, Jesus has been saying, you heard him, "Woe to you, Pharisees." He's said it 3 times so far, 3 woes. But one of the religious experts speaks up, wanting to helpfully let Jesus know, "Teacher, when you say these things, you're insulting us too." FYI, BT dubs. And I love that Jesus is like, "Oh, you're right. I'll give you some woes too." And then Jesus proceeds to fire off 3 more woes specifically to those religious experts. Because when Jesus sees hypocrisy, he calls it out. He said, "You load people down with burdens that are hard to carry, and you yourselves will not lift a finger to help them." Because they used their authority to make people's lives harder rather than better, piling on requirements, making the bar for those requirements higher and higher, then not helping or offering any grace. That's what they did. No wonder Jesus calls them out, because he's all about that grace, All those woes Jesus issued here, they make me think about people I've met over the years who walked away from church. Not from God, just from church. And they usually have a similar reason, a very similar story. They left church because church became a place that just made them feel worse about themselves and others. It made them feel more judged and less loved. Most people come to a church carrying something hard, a challenge, doubt, shame, sadness, pain, worry. And instead of finding people who might help them carry it, they found people who added to their load with more judgment and more shame, because Pharisees and religious experts will always be alive and well. So that is a big challenge for us. What kind of church do we want to be? A church of Pharisees or a church of actual Jesus followers? Do we help people cast their burdens onto Christ, or do we add to them? When people come, do they receive more grace or more judgment if they don't fit the mold that we prefer? In these stories we're reading of Jesus eating with people, we can see and hear him saying that the outward appearance doesn't matter. He will eat with anybody, anywhere, and invite anyone to his table, much to the Pharisees' chagrin. But that's because Jesus' concern is that people feel welcomed and people get fed, physically and spiritually. He doesn't care about outer appearances, the outside of the cup. He cared about the heart, the love on the inside. So, as always, we can choose if we want to follow the example of Jesus or not. Do we want to be a Jesus follower or not? Because following Jesus' example isn't easy. It can make people squirm and feel uncomfortable, just like it did 2,000 years ago at that dinner. But If we decide to start following Jesus, then we will have the blessing of sitting with him at his table. It'll be kind of a messy table, by the way, because Jesus has invited all kinds of interesting people. But if you're willing to start letting go of outer appearances, then you will open your heart to more love, a love that connects you with others, and more than that, the love of God that will transform you by washing the dirty, petty inside of your heart fully clean. And that is amazing grace indeed. Let us pray. Oh God, we confess that too often we have only looked at and cared about the outside of people's cups. And we have not even looked inside our own to see what is in our hearts. It might be dirtied up by selfishness or arrogance, or it might be empty inside. So we confess those shortcomings, and we so welcome your grace. Thank you, O God, that your grace is so amazing that it covers even us, all we have done, all that we do. So we open our hearts, open and pour out whatever is in our cup, and let your grace wash us clean. Amen.